I now have the privilege of introducing Edmond Otis. Edmond is an international known performance coach who works with professionals, businesses, public and private organisations, athletes and sports teams to increase resilience and improve results and outcomes. I was really concerned. I said, "Hi, Otis, how are you?" And I got that one out of the way, calling him by his surname. But I've managed to stuff it up anyway. I'm sorry.
But I'm happy to confuse outcomes with incomes. Right? Yeah.
A licensed psychotherapist, researcher and author, Edmond was a senior lecturer at the University of California from 1981 to 2006. Currently dividing his time between New Zealand and the US, Edmond is a senior lecturer in the School of Health and Sports Science at the Eastern Institute of Technology in the Hawke's Bay. Additionally, and this is amazing, Edmond is an international coach and lifelong veteran of intense traditional karate. Edmond blends these distinctive skills and insights into his speaking and consulting style, teaching real skills and creating dynamic content, effective strategies and pragmatic solutions for today's most complex professional and personal challenges. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the host for inviting me to be here. I was here last night, and I'm pleased that everybody was able to show up. I left early. I've been trying to think about how to be of most use here in my time here. So I get to share some time with you today, and then later on we're doing a breakout session. And it's a little bit too early in the morning, and I know you all know this, to mention that what you do in schools and education may be the last stopping point before Armageddon. It's a little bit early for that. But also, I do a lot of work in Hawke's Bay with the DHB, Health Hawke's Bay. I work with a lot of schools. And some of the things we know, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, the statistics involving youth and children and teenagers is really, really very troubling. And you know all that. One of the things I do in Hawke's Bay is we're developing a program where we reach out and develop a resilience program for students that we present in the schools. It's 4 modules built around thinking the way resilient people think, reducing stress, making difficult conversations easier, and then kind of drawing all those together so that we can function as well as possible. So that becomes a major factor. One of the things, there's new information coming out, and all of you are aware of this, and it's kind of an interesting factor, that the number one factor related to youth depression, youth anxiety, and unfortunately youth suicide is literally and truly how much time they spend looking at their telephone. Absolutely and truly. The number of minutes related to that. But the problem is when you look at that superficially, you're at risk of being the guy who stands in the cave going, my family, we're not going to use fire because I know that's bad. And also, this village is not going to use the wheel because we know that's just going to lead to destruction. And along with that, I'm not that crazy about the lever. We're not doing any of those things. So obviously that doesn't work. The true data that we see in these observations is not the fact that the technology is killing us, it's only if we don't use the technology right. Okay, the question is not, because there is no going back from fire, there's no going back from the wheel, there's no going back from the lever, and there's no going back from any of this, and nor should there be. The challenge for us is how do we use it as effectively as possible? And I'm not simply going to talk about technology. But my time with you today, I'm going to try to talk about, you don't need information about education. You know much more about than I do. But what I do know is how we change, how we develop, and how we deal with the challenges of making change. So as we go through this today, we have a short period of time. I'd like you to think about what factors your school is facing, what you would like to see change. And part of this in my work with schools is I know the technology is a big aspect of it, because any change creates conflicts and any change creates stress. And we know all that. But I'm going to look at that. And the other thing that makes it, I feel very fortunate about, obviously from the accent, I'm from the US. My family and I moved here in 2008, and we became citizens a year and a half ago. So I always try to joke that it's harder for you guys to get rid of us now. And we came over in 2005 and just fell in love with New Zealand. It's a breathtaking place. But if we're looking at social change, New Zealand is in a unique position. I feel that New Zealand is able to make these changes and organize and be more creative far better than a lot of other countries. And a lot of it has to do with our willingness to work together. What I'm learning about the Kiwi personality. When I work with athletes in the US, it's all about, okay, you need to be the number one on the field. You need to be the strongest. You need to be the fastest. In New Zealand, I've learned, and I've been able to work with a lot of individual athletes and teams, the Kiwis, and it's endearing, are much more likely to work harder for their mates than they are for themselves. Right? They're much more likely to help their mate than forward their own best interest. And so what we have here is the opportunity to change, and it's primarily based on population density. We all get to communicate with each other. One of the most interesting things to me when we first moved here was about 2009, and you'll know this much better than I do, and I don't know how the outcome was. But I remember there was a move by government, Ministry of Education came up, and they were going to reduce costs by, I believe it's cutting one position from each school. Do you guys remember that? Okay, there was turmoil about that, and there were protests, and there was change, and I don't know how the outcome was, but what was interesting to me is 2 weeks later, the Ministry of Education went on TV and said, we need to cut costs, but we made a mistake. We're not going to do it that way. So it had some effect. Again, I don't know the outcome, but as someone from the US, that's unbelievable. It's absolutely impossible. How is that possible that someone would admit that we need to change something? We need to do something different. What we said 2 weeks ago may not have been a good idea. So my feeling is we're in a position, and I do a lot of work with schools. I'm real fortunate to make those changes. So today, the amount of time I can share with you, I'm not going to talk too much about what you need to do in your schools. I'm literally interested in resilience. I'm literally interested in change, stress, and conflict, which seems to be related to what some of you, one of you saw in the AGM meeting relating to some of the things that are challenging to teachers and to your profession. Okay, today a brief overview as it applies to three interrelated factors. And again, for me, it is almost impossible to separate these three factors. If you have resilience, the definition of resilience is bouncing back in the face of adversity or hardship. But for me, I could have talked, I was thinking, well, I should do something on stress, should do something on change, maybe conflict. But for me, especially in an organization, organizations that want to have the same outcome, the three factors are interrelated. Okay, and so what I'd like to do is before we do this, so we can see if there's any validity or if you take some time, I would like you to think just for a minute, okay, of three challenges your school is facing. Now, I know there's tons of them, okay, but just for a minute, think of three challenges or one challenge or two challenge if lightning strikes today, okay, and you come out of this with the skills you need to change one thing that you're facing. What change would you like to see happen? Okay, what do you hope to get from today? How would you like your team to change? What would you like to do differently? What would you like to do better? And I'd like to see if this stuff applies. So just for a minute, you don't have to go to three, but think of three or two or one, and maybe jot it down somewhere. So at the end of this, I'd like to come back and say, if we do these things, okay, if we follow these process, might that help? And then kind of to help this, if you get all sitting with somebody next to you, tell them what you'd like to change, ask them what they'd like to change. Just for a minute, I'll give you about 30 seconds. What are you guys thinking about? Please share it with each other. One of my favorite quotes, and the way I work, because of my experience with sport and some Eastern culture and academics, and just because I tend to be more global or scattered in my look and my outlook, I tend to draw from a lot of different paradigms. One of my favorite quotes is this from Margaret Mead: always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everybody else. And I think what that tells me is there is a lot of different ways to look at our problems and a lot of different sources we can go to solve our problems and come up with solutions. Okay, when thinking about resilience, stress, change, conflict, my feeling is the same principles apply to individuals. We can tweak them a little bit and the same principles apply to groups. We can tweak those a little bit and the same principles apply to communities. And the same way the same principles apply to individuals in development and group development, team development, okay, we can think in terms of community development. It's all the same principles, because we're just arms and legs and a head. Humans are very, very similar. Aside from technology in modern times, we haven't changed that much. Okay, so the same applies to one, can't apply to another. And lately, we talk a lot about resilience. Okay, it's on TV, it's in the movies, it's what we're doing, it's what I work with the DHB to do. And in the work I do with the DHB, one of the things I want to keep in mind, if we're looking at mental health and resilience, sometimes we identify specific students, and that's important. But we have to look at the entire community. Okay, one of the things we want to do in my work, I want to try not to pathologize students too much. Everybody can work together. Everybody faces the same challenges, some a little bit more so than others. But however, aside from all the psychology, my son who's 18, early on he figured out that I do psychotherapy and I work in psychology. And his gesture on the days I see clients is he goes, "So Dad, you doing any psychology today?" Because that's what he thinks I do. He thinks it's magic. Or he thinks I think it's magic. He doesn't have much faith in it. Okay, but the kind of psychology I do, what I'm most interested in is I'm a behaviorist. And that's the psychology behind sport. And one of the things we know from behaviorism is what you do physically impacts how you feel emotionally. And what you do physically impacts how you think. So there's kind of a feedback loop. But when I first came here, I didn't know very much about New Zealand sport. I didn't know very much about rugby. After a year here, our own regional team, I got to work with our regional team, the Magpies, for about 2 years with one of the coaches before he went off to England to coach. And I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about how it works. But one of the things I understand that from sport and from behavior and the fact that most of your schools have students wear uniforms, most of your schools have behaviors that you ask them to do, those impact emotions, and we know that. For example, in sport, in Kiwi sport, New Zealand sport, I defy anybody to have ever done the haka and not feel stronger and closer and prouder the moments after you did the haka than the moments you before. That's behavioral psychology. When the All Blacks go out and they do the haka, I understand initially it's to demonstrate our strength and our commitment and who we are to the others. I believe that. But I also believe when I talk with some of the guys at Sport New Zealand, there are some countries who aren't crazy. It's good, it's good marketing and it's good visually, but there are some countries who aren't crazy about the All Blacks showing up and doing the haka. If it turns at certain competitions and tournaments that the All Blacks are not allowed to do the haka out in front of everybody, they'll do it in the locker room by themselves. It's a behavioral intervention. By doing something, I end up feeling stronger. Okay, and I think that's really important. So as a behaviorist, I am specific. I'm pretty specific as to the mechanisms of how resilient works. I'm looking at the data, and here we're talking about today, how resilient teams function, how resilient people function. I believe that it is a behavioral attribute that can be learned. Some people have a tendency more than others, but I believe everybody can learn to be resilient. Some people naturally do it and some people don't. But the truth is, we enter into situations where we learn to do something. If I want to become a teacher, I go to teacher education to learn to think as a teacher. Once I learn to think as a teacher, I start acting as a teacher. Once I start acting as a teacher, I start feeling like a teacher. It's all the same. Humans are all the same. The last, late 20th century psychology spent an awful lot of time in how you feel. I'm interested, no, actually I'm not. When I work with clients, one of the first things I tell my clients, and I genuinely say this, I try to be as sincere as possible. I'm happy to work with you, but you have to understand, I don't care how you feel. And I'm serious. I care about what you do. Because I believe what you do affects our feelings strongly. It affects our feelings as individuals, affects our feelings as groups, and affects our feelings as a community. Okay, so here's my favorite example of resilience. Can we show that? Oh, wait, before we start, sorry, hold it. Okay, a little background. It's a fairly old thing. Some of you may have seen this. It's pretty famous. These women are competing for the U.S. Olympic team. It's a 600-meter race, which is basically a really, really fast sprint. You run it like it's 100 meters, except you run it 6 times as long, and at the end of it, you want to spit up a lung. Okay, However, there's strategy involved in it. What we're looking at, and it'll clear up in a minute, is the third girl. She's kind of favored to win in this, and they're talking about her strategy. And what you'll notice she does, she's a strategic racer. She runs, and then by the third lap, she stays right behind the second girl and runs her into the ground. And then at the end, she kicks in. Okay, so it's a matter of effort and dedication and intensity, plus it's also a matter of strategy. Okay, hit it.
The 600-meter underway. Heather Dornan in Minnesota finished second this event a year ago. She was in lane 4.
And Dornan is probably going to be your favorite. She actually won the NCAA championships in 2006 in the 800, but she only won one Big Ten championship in the 2 years.
3 laps in this event, 600 meters, 3 times around the 200-meter track here at the field house.
What a bold move by Fawn. She's looking very confident, and the Penn State runner is just running amazing today. She did win her heat in the 400, but ended up taking 4th overall.
That's Fawn Dorr moving into the lead, sophomore from Penn State. Dornan running second.
Dornan last year scored 23 points for the Golden Gophers in their Big Ten championship, so they're really relying on getting a lot of points from her this weekend, and she's just coming by Fawn Dorr now in the home stretch, heading into the bell lap. Oh, went down.
Dornan falling down, gets up quickly, but that's going to cost her. Lucky she wasn't injured.
Her teammate just went to the front, though, so they may be able to recover from that. And Dornan is flying down the backstretch.
She is catching up.
She is going to catch Fawn Dorr, and she may catch the leader.
Wow.
Well, she's got Fawn.
This is a gutsy effort by Dornan. Can she pull it off? She's moving to 3rd. Dornan coming down the stretch from the outside. Dornan coming on strong. Dornan all the way. Dornan. She did it. Wow, unbelievable.
Okay, can you go back to that point, please, and just hold it? Okay, so fabulous, right? Everybody got goosebumps? I see this all the time. I still get goosebumps. I feel this is so inspiring. When I work with boys' high schools, the boys shut up and pay attention. They get over the fact that it's girls really, really quickly. Okay, fabulous. But here's what's interesting to me. Along with all the attributes she has, we don't see the resilience until she falls down. Now, obviously, she's resilient to get there, but we don't see the resilience until she falls down. So what we're looking at, okay, is the one attribute for individuals, for groups, for communities that allow us to be resilient above all others. Okay, can you just, okay, she's here, she's running, then right when she falls down and she's skidding across the dirt, stop it. Okay, so wait, here she has a plan, right? She's kicking it in, remember? She's following the girl, run her into the ground, she's kicking it in, go.
The home stretch, heading into the bell lap.
Stop. At this point, her plan goes right down the toilet. No more plan. What does she have? If you can turn the sound down and run it again, and just keep it going. At this point, what resilient trait does she have that's the most important beyond all others? What does she have? Self-commitment, all the trait she has is she has flexibility. She has cognitive, emotional flexibility. She still keeps her mind on the goal, but she needs to change her strategy. That's no one would have blamed her if she just laid there for 2 extra seconds, hit the dirt, looked at her mom, looked at her coach, and go, damn it. But she didn't do that. What she was able to do is change and keep moving towards her source. So one of the things we look at for anybody about resilience is flexibility. And why we're fortunate when we work in groups and we form a community and we work as a group, is we're able to help each other develop that flexibility. Okay, we're good. I'm just going to go on. Thank you very much. Okay. So we know there's 4 rules from performance psychology. And these 4 rules apply to any changes we want to make, any way we want to be. And I use the same slide when I talk about performance psychology. I use the same slide when I talk about sports psychology. I use the same slide when I talk behavioral psychology. I use the same slide when I talk about health psychology. I use the same slide when I talk about industrial psychology. And I use the same slide when I try to talk about common sense. We know that 4 things affect our performance and whether we're able to change our performance and whether we're able to improve our performance. And these things either work for us or against us. Now, it's somewhat artificial because as soon as we start talking about them, obviously they all overlap. Okay? But the first thing we know, let's start at the top. The first thing we know is that actions affect our performance. What we do, literally physically what we do. For example, I mentioned the haka. By doing that, regardless of how I feel, it's impossible not to be inspired. I've never done it. No one is geekier and less sportier and more academic and not a team player and sarcastic than my youngest son. He's fabulous. Okay? But he's not a sporty guy in a group setting. He does karate, but that's an individual sport. First time he did the haka, oh man, I feel so stupid. We have to do this for the school and somebody's leaving. How did it feel afterwards? God, he was tingling. It surprised him. We know that what we do affects our actions. If you get a chance, and some of you may have seen this, there's a fabulous TED Talk by a woman named Amy Cuddy. Have you guys heard this? It's about body language. So if you look up TED Talks, Cuddy, she's one of those educators, she looks like she's 12, but she's a senior lecturer at Harvard. Really, really smart. Her research is all about body language. Okay, and it turns out we know body language. If you got to meet somebody, head up, eyes up, apply for a job, smile, shake hands, and all that. So body language affects how people think about us. But it turns out the body language affects how we think about ourselves. You can assume body language positions, okay, by yourself for 3 minutes. And again, it's not that weird voodoo psychology. They do a saliva swab before and after. 2 minutes. You assume the body language position, your testosterone level changes, and your cortisol level changes. The hormone that makes you feel more assertive and more in control of yourself goes up. The hormone that makes you more insecure and more anxious because you're under stress goes down. 2 minutes. Fabulous research. Okay, so what you do with your students, Mr. and Miss, all those things affect. We know that our thoughts affect our actions. Here's something fabulous based on that research. Okay, everybody, just do this for me. It'll just be fun. Repeat after me, please. I suck. I suck. I suck. Okay, now repeat after me. Yay, me. Yay, me. Yay, me. Can I wait? It's goofy, but listen. One more time, I suck. Yay, me. Just a little bit. You feel different. Little tiny bit, like a little bit of coffee for me. You feel different after you say yay me than after you say I suck. Just a little bit. Everybody feel that? Just a tiny bit. And again, saliva swab, we could check. You spend 2 minutes saying positive things, not fake things. I can try hard. I'm going to work hard. I can do this. It's a challenge, but I'm capable. Body language turns out, brain chemistry changes, then I suck, this sucks, this is terrible, and there's no good. We're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. Interesting stuff. We know that our relationships, so for those of you, obviously, most of you are in charge of building teams, building communities among your coworkers and in your school and with your families, and reaching out from what's going on in the schools to out of the schools and bringing all that back and forth together significantly affects how we feel. And then finally, our emotions affect how we feel. Okay, so in all of these things either work for us or against us. So it's the basic rules of performance, the basic rules of change. There's another view. People that are resilient seem to have a GPS in their head. They're able, and what does a GPS do? A GPS continually triangulates, right? They're able to figure out where they are and where they need to be. And in a smaller group, we'll talk about this in my in the breakout session. Okay, in a smaller group, I ask everybody, especially the kids, how does a GPS work? Well, it triangulates, right? In the old days, old school GPS was a map, right? And this was the satellite. So on a map, you open a map, I want to go there, I want to go there, I want to go to Hawke's Bay. What else do you need to find? Where you are. Otherwise, it doesn't do you any good. Now, here's the trick question, sort of. What does the GPS tell you? What does anybody? Huh? How to get there? No. Say again? Where you are, yes, also, but what does the GPS tell you? Brilliant. A GPS tells you what you need to do next. I say Hawke's Bay, GPS doesn't say, oh no, it's pretty far. GPS says go to the corner and turn left. Then go 5 kilometers, turn right. So resilient people seem to function in that way. Resilient people seem to do actions that affect their performance in a positive way, and you can control that. And resilient people also are continually able, to answer, what do I do next? The girl on my video, her name is Heather Dorndon, brilliant, brilliant athlete. As a coach, any coaches in here, wouldn't it be fabulous to coach someone like that? When she landed, bang, and skidded, all she was able to think about is, what do I do next? She wasn't able to go, oh no, I've disappointed everybody. Oh no, I'm going to lose. Okay, and that's important. And as a community, as students, one of the things we're doing when we're working with the Youth Resilience Group in Hawke's Bay, when I'm in the high schools, is the question we ask. Can we get to a point where we say, what do I do next? And that's the first question. And then we tell them, but what if you don't know what to do next? What if you literally don't know what to do next? That becomes the challenge of what to do next. So say, I want to develop this action. I want to be able to use the technology in a way that helps us. I want our school to move forward. I want to involve the community, but I don't know what to do. So you ask, what do I do next? That's another thing that resilient people do. Okay, I was looking at some of this because I know some of the groups around here, and in the U.S. when I work with schools, the whole thing about bringing technology into the schools is a big thing, and wanting to get it right. And two things on this chart, you may have seen this before. There's a guy named Andrew Berg who talks about bringing technology in, and I believe they work for one of the companies, Schoology, which is growing a tremendous reputation. But the two things that affected me most, as far as teachers, is the aspect of pedagogical dogma. The big worry is it's not going to be able to do what we want to do. After we're exposed to it, they realize it's going to be tremendously helpful. That's number two. And then the really big one, because that's what I'm interested in, is self-efficacy. I'm not going to be able to use this, but after exposure, they are. And this fits into what we think about conflict, change, and stress. So this is what we think we know. And again, as we go forward, all of you have come up with some things you'd like your school to change, perhaps. Here's what we know, and real quick. First of all, would change. In general, in the biggest picture, there are two types of change. And we also know that the only thing that causes stress is change. The two types of change are A, the kind of change we want to make happen, and B, the kind of change that's being forced on us. Okay, the kind of change we can't avoid. Resilient groups, resilient communities recognize that once we have the change we can't avoid, we want to make that change work for us as well as possible. Okay, so change requires patience and acceptance of human nature. For any of you who are coaches, this next model comes directly out of sports psychology about how teams acclimate to change season after season after season. And we have some wonderful examples of that. First of all, you can't force change. And so the method we look at, or the idea we look at, it comes from four initials, F, S, N, P. And as far as I can tell, this speaks to change as far as the human condition is concerned. It speaks to change in groups, it speaks to change in organizations, it speaks to change in communities, it speaks to change when you start dating somebody. It speaks to change when you're a kid and you start riding the bicycle. Okay, the first letter is F, and that means forming. Okay, no change happens unless we formulate a concept of what it's going to be like, what we want to accomplish. You ask somebody out for dinner, or do you want to have a drink, and you think, it's going to go pretty well. It might not go pretty well. I remember when I was a kid, I was about 6, I wanted to learn to ride my bike. I had this vision of what it would be like. And what I visualized, because I saw the big kids, I was raised in a town called named Santa Barbara, and it was a surf town in California. And I remember seeing the big kids riding their bike with their surfboards on their bikes right in there, and I was going to do that. So I had this formation. Okay, we may think how something is going to be. The next letter stands for S, and that letter stands for storming. Now, in the AGM meeting, the poll about satisfaction, one of the number 2 factor that causes most job satisfaction is conflicts between organizations. Okay, if you look at sports, most professional teams of high caliber have about the same amount of talent out there. Pound for pound, they pretty match up. Okay, but S stands for storming. Am I able to bring it together and work together so we all know our roles? Because some teams can do that and some teams can't. Some schools can do that and some schools can't. When I was riding my bike, I'm on the bike. I'm riding down. I remember, it's going to be great. Bam, bam. I kept falling over. I wasn't very coordinated. My dad didn't believe in trainer wheels. You'll be fine. Bam, bam. Till we get it. But there's always that conflict. Okay, if you're involved in sport, we know that every season, if there's one new player, if there's a new coach, if there's a new faction, we almost need to start over again. Because you need to restructure. You need to get used to each other. So we have preseason. The third letter stands for norming. Things start working out. It's starting to work out. And some of you may think, as we think about the ideas you put down, that you'd like to change. Okay, are you still struggling with them? Are you norming? Is it starting to work? With norming, I think I'm on the bike. It's working, but I have to use all my concentration not to fall over. Okay, with the staff, we start to understand our roles. We're not butting heads. And finally, the fourth letter stands for performing. You're able to do the function without thinking about it. It becomes an extension. So you can ride the bike, and I got a surfboard, and I get to ride down the hill. Or your team functions well. Or your staff functions well. Or your classroom functions well. Okay? Next, we look at stress. Stress isn't bad. Nothing happens without stress. The only thing that got you up in the morning, okay, is stress. The person whose phone that is experiencing stress right now. Okay? So what we know is that nothing happens without stress. We would just lay there. Okay, stress either got us up today because I got to come to this meeting, my back hurts, I had to go to the toilet, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, got to call my family, whatever. In a way, stress and motivation are interchangeable. Again, brilliant research, little TED Talk if you get a chance. I forget her name. Another 12-year-old who teaches at Yale or Cambridge or something. Okay, bizarre. Okay, but just brilliant. And what she talks about is the fact, and if you look up TED Talk stress, I don't know her name, that we know that stress wears you down. Okay, stress is bad for you unless you think it's good for you. Okay, people who think stress is good for them feel better about it, and they actually do very well. The difference, one of the reasons everybody is so fascinated by sport, okay, is what you get to see is people trying hard in real time in front of everybody. You're taking risks out there in public. But the difference between athletes and people who are in frontline situations, I'm sure a lot of you, most of you, it's going to be a tough day. I got to rev up. You listen to the right music, you drink enough coffee, you wear your power clothes, you do whatever, you walk in there because you're excited to get going, especially if you have a big task. You have a big task, that's what you want to do. Stress isn't bad unless you perceive it as bad. Stress generates the energy to do what we need to do, but at the same time, okay, you can't hide, and stress is unavoidable. And so what we know is that change causes stress, but also stress causes change. If you embrace the stress and you go and you say to your staff, we're going to start this new thing, and it's going to be tough for a little bit. But we're going to work together, and the outcome is going to be tremendous. The benefit is going to be important. Okay? Stress allows us to do amazing things. It makes the impossible possible. Now, here's the thing. One of the reasons we moved, my family and I moved to New Zealand, we moved here in 2008. We came over and visit in 2005. We came over again in 2006. We weren't sure. In 2006, I was at the Bay of Islands. And it's a touristy thing, but it's really cool. You get to go on a boat and you swim with the dolphins in the right season. Have you guys done that? Locals never, some of you done that, most of you, but it's fabulous, right? So my older boy and I would jump in the water. I'm not a good swimmer, but he did surf life save. Really fabulous. So we're out there swimming with the dolphins, and it was just breathtaking. We get back in the boat, and I took 4 pictures like this. And we get back in the boat, and over the side of the boat, I couldn't believe it. I click, click, click. We had a camera at the time. And I see this literal thing, these cows jumping with this dolphin. And evidently what happened is about 5 years earlier, there was a boat carrying cattle, and there was a big storm and it sank. And most of the cattle naturally died. But in the effort to adjust the stress, some of the cows, in accommodating the stress, were able to develop the skills they needed to swim with the dolphins. How many of you believe me? Okay, here's the thing. For the benefit of my talk and for you to get as much value out of this as possible, it's going to work better if you try to believe me. So let's pretend this is a real picture. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, what I'd like is I'm going to show this picture again. It'd be really great for make me feel good if some of you go, wow, and some of you scream out, I've seen that myself. Ready? And so stress allows the impossibly possible.
I've seen that myself.
Exactly. Okay. But anyway, it's true, right? Nothing phenomenal would happen without stress. Nothing amazing would happen without stress. Right? Nobody would do anything without stress. But we tend to avoid it because we're a little bit overwhelmed. But we have to keep in mind that stress and motivation are interchangeable. And fundamentally, there's 2 ways to deal with stress. Now, here's the problem. And there's different ways of thinking about it, but I see this with individuals and groups and teams and organizations. In the 2 ways, we choose between front-load stress and rear-load stress. And I'm pretty sure this is my term, so I should put a trademark there. But here's how it works. Front-load stress means we have a problem that's bothering us. It keeps us awake at night. And we say to ourselves, I'm going to do what I need to do to make that problem go away. I'm going to bring my resources together so that never bothers me again. Rear load stress means you just put up with it. And it bothers you a little bit. Now, there's all different ways of doing this. Okay, I think of it as units of investment. If I have something that bothers me, 1 unit a day. I live in a house and the roof leaks. And when it rains, I have to move pots around to do that. But when it doesn't rain, I forget about it. And storm after storm after storm, I move the pots around. So every time I do that, it's 1 unit of effort. But to fix that may take 10 units of effort. I get some mates to help me. I go to Miter 10. I don't do that. I hire somebody to do that because I can't do anything. Okay, but you invest the energy and it's never a problem again. That's important. One of the things we see that tears organizations down, and we tend not to want to bring things up, is it's a problem every single day. That's called rear load stress. It's always there. Front load stress allows us to resolve it, to fix it. Now, there's all different ways of doing about it. Not doing anything about it is important. But sometimes one of the ways to fix it, and some people, you decide it's not a problem. Okay, all of you have undoubtedly sitting at home with your family, with husband, wife, partner, whatever, and you're watching TV and you doze off in front of the TV. Anybody ever done that? Okay, of course. All of you have the situation, it's 11 o'clock at night, okay, or it's 1 o'clock in the morning, you wake up, you have a big meeting, and you're laying there at night and you can't get to sleep because way down 2 blocks away there's a dog barking every now and then. Everybody done that? Something like that? Of course. If you can fall asleep on the couch, you can fall asleep with the dog barking 2 blocks away. So a lot of it is what we decide. If we continue to struggle with the problem, I hate it, rear load stress. If we say to ourselves, it's a new day, this is what we have, or I'm just going to accept it, front load stress. But you have to be honest with yourself. So that's a factor we look at as well. Okay, but it's subtle, but for most organizations, one seems to work better than the other. It is not good to allow problems to fester in an organization. It is better to address what you need to do and get it out of the way. And you do that through communication. Next, we look at conflict. Every team is different, but this is what we know about effective organizations. And again, I'm just going to go through this briefly. This is kind of a short version. I do day-long workshops and all that, but this is kind of a short version of all this, and we do some exercise about this. But this is what we know. For an organization to be effective, and I think of an organization as any group larger than one that has a common goal. Okay, so an organization is me and my mate going fishing. I think he's coming on Tuesday. He thought he was coming on Wednesday. I thought he was going to bring the equipment. He thought I was going to bring the equipment. I was going to bring the beer. He was going to bring the food. And we get that all wrong. Right down to sport organizations, to families, to schools, okay, to communities. We know the 3 factors are important. One is teamwork, one is clarity, one is consistency. We could spend a lot of time on each of these, but the one I want to talk about right now is teamwork. And people frequently misunderstand what teamwork is. Teamwork does not mean that you all agree. Everyone on a team does not agree. Teamwork means that everyone on the team agrees to agree. That's an important difference. We talk back and forth. Tuesday, I can't do Tuesday, I'm working Wednesday, I can get off work Wednesday. You got the boat? Yeah, I'll bring the beer. Okay, fine. We agree to agree. Your organizations, your families, your teams. And this is where we mess up, I think. Okay, you need a lot of decision making about what you're going to do. But once you decide, if you're a member of that team, and we see this with any organization, it's over whether or not we all agree. We're done with that. If we're part of the team, we agree to agree. And then we get to move forward. And then maybe the team decides part of your structure is, next week, let's see how we feel about this. And we may revisit it. There's tons of fluidity. But again, that becomes important. And for the organizations I work with, that's one thing. The second thing is clarity. The short version is everybody knows what's up. Okay, the 5th version is consistency. And those are important. Okay, leaders, managers, coaches, your position, you only have one job. You only do one thing. Basically, you communicate. When I talk to coaches, when I talk to parents, when I talk to teachers, okay, in my own life, basically we communicate. And this is a great thing. I really don't know who to attribute this to. I didn't think this up myself. I'm trying to find it. It's kind of from the 1970s, I believe. But basically what it says is why leaders communicate. And when you're functioning in a position as a leader, you do 5 things, and they overlap. The first thing you do is you share information, right? That's about clarity. Okay? The next thing you do is you express yourself. So if I'm a coach, okay, or if I'm a headmaster, or if I'm a supervisor, and we're going to say, we're going to start this new program. We're looking at this new technology, and I believe strongly it's going to really help us. I believe in this, and I really want to. I'm going to work as hard as I can with you to keep it happen. I'm not going to shove it off on you. I'm going to stay involved in the process. I want to make this happen. The next thing we do is we command others. Now, command's a pretty strong word, but the reality is, in organizations, we're not flock animals. We're pack animals. There is no group of humans anywhere doing a task where somebody isn't somewhat in charge. There's different ways of deciding, right? But somebody leads, somebody initiates. And sometimes somebody says, hey, can you do that, and can you do this, and we're going to meet Thursday, and can you bring the car, and I have the funding, and can you do this? So command's a strong word, but it's not my word, it's the program's word. But that's important. You look at governments. We're having an election coming up. There's big changes in the election. I'm fascinated. Because I stopped looking at my country's politics a while ago. But anyway, okay, but I'm fascinated. But what we know about a democracy, one of the main functions of democracy? We all get together and agree who's in charge in an emergency. That's what a democracy does. Okay, who leads? Okay, from there, we resolve conflicts. How can each of us meet as many of our needs as possible? And from there, we try to persuade and influence. So that's an important model. And that's what we do. Okay? And it comes back to this. We know that our actions affect our performance. We know that our thoughts affect our performance. We know that our interactions clearly affect our performance. And we know that our emotions affect our performance. Again, then talk is cheap. Okay? What happens is the rule. And so I see lots of organizations. I see sports teams. Okay, what are your values? Well, we work hard, we respect each other, okay, and we're committed to each other. Yet, a look on the field, athletes come in late, they swear at each other, they push each other around. And so that's not the rule. The rule is we say these are our values, then we do something else. That's our values. The totality of what happens is your value, right? Are your words consistent with your actions? When we talk about coaches, we talk about leaders, we talk about directors, there's this really interesting concept. It's the 3 selves. And basically the most effective leaders, the most effective bosses, most effective teachers, most effective coaches are the ones that how they see themselves is pretty close to how other people see them, and is pretty close to how they want to be. I would say the same would be true with the school, because as we know, schools are becoming almost the only true community organization that affects everybody. And you know this. Everybody's distracted. Everybody's separate. But at schools, we have the opportunity to bring a community together. But what happens is the rule. And we'll talk about that in the breakout session. Okay, finally, what time is it? How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Good. Okay. We'll have some time for questions. Finally, we know this. There are 2 traps for any organization. Okay, one of the traps is called irregular reinforcements. It's irregular reinforcement theory, and the other is the broken window theory. Okay, and irregular reinforcements basically speak to the fact that when we're not sure about something, we become really fascinated. Right? So if I try to do something, I'm not sure how it works, I become obsessed. Okay, this thing, right, your phone, is all about irregular reinforcements. Every now and then, something's going to show up that I may be interested or maybe not. But the irregular reinforcements are the reason for some people gambling becomes so important, such an urgency. And what we know is, and teachers know this, principals know this, coaches know this, Okay, if I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be, if I break the rules, or if I change things, or if I'm not consistent, I become fascinated by that. It's fascinating. It's how gambling works. You know, I'm convinced, I used to live in California, and about once every 2 months, we'd go to Vegas. Okay, it's a 5-hour drive. And I've been doing that since I was a kid, since I was waiting on tables. On Friday night, we'd get our tips, drive to Vegas, and come back. Later on, I started going to Vegas because one of my clients was a professional gambler. Literally, that's what he did. And I would go to him and I would sit and watch him gamble. I can't help him gambling, but it's all about, is too much ego getting ahead of him? Is this too much, hubris? Is he being reasonable? Is back and forth? And he did fairly well. And so that was fabulous. But what we know about gambling, my old university did this great research project. Okay, they did it on compulsive gambling, and in the basement of the psychology building, they brought in a bunch of pokie machines, and they were paying students $50 an hour, and this is like 25 years ago, so that's big money. $50 an hour to come and gamble for 2 hours. You don't get to keep the money. So you go down, it's a nice room, there's food, no alcohol, and so the students came in, regular people came in, the students were lined up, because $50 an hour 30 years ago was a lot of money. Okay, and then they had a bunch of compulsive gamblers come in, and they did all these little tests. Turns out, if you have a gambling thing going on, you put the money in, you pull the machine, and you're fascinated to see what happens. And even though you don't get to win the money, if you win, yes. And if you lose, you really feel depressed. People who don't have that situation, just kind of looking at it. Okay? Obviously, okay, teenagers, youth, kids are all about consistency. So some things, and what we know from sport, okay, is, you want people to be brave, you want them to be confident, you want them to take chances. And what we know from sport is you need a consistent base that we can depend on. And if I have a consistent base, I'm able to take chances. I'm able to go out there. Okay, broken window theory, basically, long story short, again, has to do with law enforcement in the U.S. In the U.S. and everywhere else, building goes empty. Inner city, people are going to break the windows just because it's fun, and then they graffiti on it just because it's fun. Okay, and so what they were trying to figure, what do we do without having a cop there, because that's not any good. Turns out, somebody breaks the window, you show up that day and fix the window. Happens again, you fix the window. They leave the window alone. All of your schools. If somebody somebody puts graffiti on the wall, how long does it take you to paint over it? That day, right? That's the broken window theory. If you leave it, the person who did the damage, they start fighting you for who owns that wall. But as soon as it's up there, you paint it over, they move on. It's never a struggle. You may have to paint over it twice, maybe 3 times. But then they go on to something else. So this is important for organizations. So for example, for the schools investing in new technology, one of the things you need to do is really embrace it and bring people in to show you how to use it so that you get the outcomes that you want. Not you buy it, you spend the money, we're not doing it, we're not this, because you end up with all of this. Okay, which brings us back to this, and I keep coming back here. If we're interested in performance, as organizations, as communities, only 4 factors affect it. And there's a billion different ways of going about it. But only 4 factors affect it. Literally, what are we doing? What do we do? What behaviors do we engage in? Literally, what are we thinking? Are our thoughts positive or negative? Okay? Along with that, are we saying, yay me, or I suck? Because again, if I had the technology, we do saliva swab. You say yay me for 2 minutes, you're going to get much different saliva swabs than if you say I suck for 2 minutes, even if you say them by yourself. So what we do is important, what we think is important. Our emotions. How do we interpret our emotions? How do we interpret what we're doing? Okay, and that affects thoughts and actions. And then our relationships. How do we develop the community we want to develop? I want to go back only because it burns a hole in my brain. The rates of depression in youth and all that, especially in New Zealand, but other countries as well, directly, and the big significant change in 3 years is, again, how we look at this. How much time do we spend? But this is the wheel and the lever and fire. The question is, how well do we use the technology to create what we want? And we haven't done a very good job so far just because it's new. I imagine a lot of people burnt down their villages early on. Okay, and a lot of people got that wheel and that lever and they went off the side of a cliff. Some of us are still doing that. But in general, we need to coordinate. There's no going back from this, nor should there be. But this is either a tool or it's a wedge. It's either going to develop our communities together, okay, or it's going to separate our communities, and we're going to be more and more isolated. So from what we talked about today, I asked you to think about some things. If you think about the challenges you're facing, what you'd like to change, okay, we talked a little bit about resilience, we talked about performance, but then some of the things we talked about as far as change. Some of the things we talked about as far as stress. Okay, some of the things we talked about as far as conflict. For you or against you? Are you using them in your favor or not? Would some of these things help? Would some of these concepts help? Now at the end of this, I'll work with whoever has some kind of technological savvy. I'll convert these slides, if anybody's interested, into a PDF. And I'm happy to just put them online if you feel they're useful in some way. If you'd like to share them, I'd be delighted to. So I'll put that up there if somebody can help me with that, because I'm really not very good at that. And if you want to do that, I think that'll be useful. Good, everybody. Thank you all very, very much.